Welcome back to the CNN Global Town Hall. Our next guest is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's a member of the President's Coronavirus Task Force and the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
And he is here to answer your questions, of course, about the coronavirus. Dr. Fauci, welcome.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much for your service, sir. I know you're pulling in very long hours. We appreciate it. Let me get right to it. You've been saying that we should wait for the data to decide whether or not to start pulling back on some of these recommendations and maybe allowing people to go back to work. I've been looking at the data, I know you have as well. It seems pretty clear that the numbers are not only increasing, but accelerating in places that had no cases or very few cases last week are now in the thousands. So why raise the idea that a pullback is even close, Dr. Fauci?
Well, I think that the president was trying to do, he was making an aspirational projection to give people some hope, but he's listening to us when we say we really got to reevaluate it in real time, and any decision we make has to be based on the data. I mean, you know, the numbers that you showed, when you have a situation when the cases today compared to tomorrow is increased dramatically, and then the next day is increased dramatically, that's no time to pull back. That's when you got to hunker down, nail down, mitigate, get the people taken care of. That's what you got to concentrate on. You have to go with the data.
Dr. Fauci, as you mentioned, you said the virus makes the timeline. The notion, though, of people getting back to work in some places, it's sort of based on the idea that there's hotspots in right now in New York City, California. We've seen Washington, New Orleans seems to be in trouble, and some other places seem to be coming up in terms of cases. But then there's places where they haven't seen so much. Are you confident that the places that haven't had a lot of recorded cases, that's just not a question of testing? Is it a question of the virus isn't there?
Well, it's probably a combination of both, but I think it's more that they have not yet had that kind of escalation that we've seen in cities like New York. And just a point about those areas that have low levels, like they're about, I think 19 out of 50 states have 200 cases or less in a state. That's the time, if you're going to do anything in those places, you've got to be very aggressive in identification, isolation, contact tracing. When people are infected, get them out of society, put them in a way where they're isolated, and then trace the others. That's all containment. You don't want to get to the point where you have to start mitigating. So what we're talking about is trying to get to the point where we don't allow these issues to come up to the point of needing mitigation. But in order to do that, as I've said and as Dr. Birx have said, you need to get the data and you need to act on the data. Because if it's escalating, there's no way you want to tone down. You want to be able to suppress what's there while it's at a low level.
So you want to see more testing, especially in places where they have low numbers of cases, in order to gather data. I mean, are there people gathering that data? Are they doing the contact tracing in states that have less than 200 cases?
Well, today the president wrote a letter to the governors talking about sort of a new approach to this kind of county by county not mitigation, but contact tracing, where what you actually do is you do testing there. Now, that's going to be through the public health apparatus, which the CDC has networks that are really for flu surveillance, and you can adapt those networks to be coronavirus surveillance. When you do that, then you could plug in the identification, isolation, and contact tracing. Again, it's going to attempt to do that. I hope they'll be successful, but that's what the plan is, to use that network to do the kind of surveillance we've done with flu.